This is Abe Friedtanzer from Awards Buzz, and I'm very excited to be speaking with Arianne Phillips about A Complete Unknown. How are you today?
I'm great. How are you?
Good, good. You worked with James Mangold a number of times, and especially on Walk the Line, which has some relevance story-wise to A Complete Unknown.
Mhm.
What is your working relationship like, and how has it changed over the course of several decades?
Yeah, Jim and I's first movie together was Girl Erupted, which was 1999. You know, it's very rare that as a costume designer that I feel so equitable to a director just in terms of my contribution. Jim is very generous in terms of how he works with his collaborators. And I'm not, oftentimes it's very easy for a director to kind of silo a department head into specifically just costume, but Jim is always, to his credit, engaged me and encouraged me to collaborate across departments with all department heads. So there is always like a beautiful flow between the cinematographer, in this case, Faden Papa Michael, who I've worked with many times, and Jim's longtime collaborator, and Francois Adoye, and just the ability for all of us to come together and have these conversations is unfortunately rare and really special. This movie in particular, we had an unusual amount of lead time because of numerous delays. And so it did afford us more time to think about the project and let it marinate. Basically, Jim asked me in 2019 if I would join him on this movie, and due to COVID and schedules and then we got going, and then the strike, we had an extraordinary amount of time to discuss the material and research, which I feel allowed me go to a kind of a deeper level than normal. Because as we know, usually we get these jobs, it's like, okay, let's go tomorrow, 0 to 60. So it was very special in that way.
This film also presented a particular challenge because you have all these very iconic people and looks that have devoted fan bases, and people want to, they'll recognize if something doesn't look quite right. What was your approach to make sure to capture things as close to how they originally were as possible?
Well, first of all, I try not to focus at all on other people's on perception. It's really about, for me, it's more about becoming very fluent with the material, in this case, the research, and not only what was um, specific to our story and the movie we're telling, which is just 4 years of Bob's life, 61 to 65, but also just being fluent on, where he goes from there, and beyond 1965, and the people around him and the milieu, whether it was you know socially, politically, geographically. There's just so many ways to um and so many aspects to research in terms of recreating real events, and making sure that we do our best um, to honor the what existed. I mean, we with Bob, there is an extraordinary amount of photos and news footage and accounts, and so honoring that. And for me, forensically, the first thing I do with the script, of course, is break it down, and also I created a document of events that we're recreating that existed. And then also, there's a lot of public record of Bob, whether it's album covers, newsreels, or photos, but not, and we had the same issue on Walk the Line. No personal photos, like no, like we didn't have I did another biopic, The People vs. Larry Flint. That was unusual because Larry Flint himself was involved in the production, and I got to see all his family albums. That wasn't the case in Walk the Line, and Johnny and June had passed away by the time we made the movie, and unfortunately, the everything was tied up in probate, and we didn't have access to any private images. And the same, well, not the same, but in Bob Dylan's case, we didn't have, uh, you know, access to his personal images. So just figuring out, over the course of the film, Timmy has 66, 67 costume changes. So for, doing that breakdown of figuring out the trajectory of our story and the character arc, let alone all the other characters, Pete Seeger, Joan Baez, Alan Lomax, John Hammond, on and on and on, and then our background players and stuff. So we had like 5,000 backgrounds, so we had to amass a lot of vintage clothes to dress all these background actors. And all our actors between like 1 and 20 on the call sheet, they all had at least 5, 15, 20, sometimes 25 changes depending on who they were. So the great thing about the delay with this movie is it really allowed me time to marinate and to do research on all these people, and whether that was visual research or reading biographies on not just Bob but on Joan Baez and Alan Lomax and Pete Seeger, and refreshing myself on Johnny Cash. um, but it's very rare with the case with Johnny Cash's character that you get to revisit a character. I think I've really only done it one other, well, other than a sequel, one other time. But it is a gift and really special. I did it with Hedwig and the Angry Inch. We did the movie, and then 14 years later, we did the Broadway play. So it was revisiting the character, but in a different format. And here I get to revisit Johnny Cash with a different actor and the same director. And that was really thrilling. That was really fun. And yeah, so there was a lot to forensically excavate in terms of what existed and what we were recreating for a story. One of the wonderful things about Jim Mangold, and Jim also, said this when we worked on Girl Erupted, which was based on a book, when we did Walk the Line, and then even on 310 to Yuma, when we were creating a Western, and it was based on a movie in the 50s. Jim always says, we're not beholden to, we don't have to be, we should know our history, we should know what we're doing, but we are, creating our own entity, the essence of a person and a character. Timmy is not Bob Dylan, we are, but my job as costume designer, I firmly believe, is to help the audience on this journey engage, and I think with the way that we approached Bob Dylan's look with Timmy was to be able to tell that story and go there with the audience to help the audience on the journey of Bob Dylan. And it was a really rich and passionate experience for me.
Sure, with so many costume changes, it's hard to pinpoint, but do you have a favorite or favorites that just really immediately stand out to you?
Well, there are some moments that I really love because they help underscore the story of the times. I mean, one of the things that was my through line with Bob was his denim story. Because, the thing that's so unique about our movie is that it's a biopic, but it's only 4 years of his life. It's not from birth to death, which is traditionally what a biopic is, the trajectory of someone's whole life. But yet we are telling the journey of a young man finding his creative voice and who he is in the world, a 19-year-old to 24-year-old. And one of the things that is consistent with Bob visually is his jeans. He always wore jeans, and he always wore boots, and we see his hair changing. So I knew one of the wonderful things about the opportunity of being a costume designer is being able to show that growth, that evolution through our story, that character arc. Because let's face it, the cars don't really change, the architecture doesn't really change, technology doesn't really change. So working also with Jamie Lee McIntosh, the hair designer, was really thrilling, and really figuring out with Jim, like how we were going to break it down, like 61, 62 to 63, 64, and then boom, 65. And being able to follow that thread of his denim and his boots and his hair really kept it grounded and consistent. And I believe you can continue that thread all the way to Bob Dylan today at 80. I think there are certain ways that he dresses that he still dresses. I think if we think back to our glory days, like in our 20s or in high school, I think there are things we take on that really become part of who we are. And you see that with Bob, and being able to use that as a grounding point was really helpful. And uh yeah, so there are some favorite things. I mean, if doing the research, in 65, Bob's look changed so much, and I learned that he had gone to England and on tour, as Joan Baez, and he came back and he's wearing those he's dressed very mod, almost like the way the Beatles were dressed. And I learned he was a big fan of the Beatles. He had hung out with them. He'd hung out with Donovan, and you see his style evolution on the other side of that, right? In 65, like that big difference. He's wearing the Cuban heel boots, the skinny jeans, the military pea coat, which was something that he that as a was influenced by the style in London. And we saw lots of, not lots, but images of him getting measured for bespoke made shirts. You see him, he's wearing the tab collar shirt in 65. Um, so that was really fun. And then, beyond 65 and 66, he goes completely nuts with the way that he's dressed. He's wearing like polka dot suits and stripes and everything. And so I wanted to see that in our movie. You see the polka dot shirt that he wears in our movie, and you see the color. He started to wear more color. Well, he was very drab. It was very, I learned a lot reading this book, Free Will in Time by Suze Rotello, who was his girlfriend. It was on the cover of the Free Will in album. And she talked a lot about how he very thoughtfully in the early days dressed himself. He was very considerate about how he wore, in that kind of Woody Guthrie look. The Pendleton shirt, the kind of real Americana dungaree, painter pant, carpenter jeans. I kind of assumed that it was just a messy 19-year-old boy dressing as you would coming from the Midwest. But I learned from Susan Tello, from her book, that that was actually very thoughtful look that he put together himself. That was really modeled on his hero at that time, Woody Guthrie. And then you think about it and you think, when you are 19, 20, 23, 24, you're really finding out who you are. You're finding out your relationship to the world. And in this case, the artist that he is, his perception of how, his style choices, and you see him as he becomes known very quickly, and he's living behind his sunglasses, and that there's those kind of things are really important to me to help the character arc of the story we're telling.
Like, well, since this is Awards Buzz, I'm always curious, the people I'm talking to, what have you seen lately? Is there a film or a show where the costumes really stood out to you and you think they're really memorable?
I have a few. I mean, it's a great year for costumes. I mean, I love the costumes by Jacqueline West for Dune. I think they're incredible and so creative, and I loved her work in the first one and the second one. Newcomer designer Jocelyn Pierce, who designed Honora, I thought those were fantastic contemporary costumes and just said so much about the characters. Really, really enjoyed them. My colleagues, Danny Glicker, who designed Saturday Night, I thought he just encapsulated the 70s and the time so beautifully. And Aaron Bannock, who did The Bike Riders, loved that movie and all the details and everything. I mean, Paul Tazwell's Wicked. There are so many great films. Costume wise this year, very, very rich year for costumes.
I agree. Well, thank you so much for taking some time to speak with me today and looking forward to seeing your next projects.
Thank you so much, Abe. It was a pleasure to talk to you.